My father did not just kick me out into a blizzard, he placed a $2 million bet on my death. That was the price tag on my frozen corpse. When I begged for my life at the Iron Gate, my sister's boyfriend just laughed and checked his Rolex. He said the temperature is dropping, Sienna, so hurry up and die because Dad needs a new church wing. But they made one fatal mistake. They thought the cold would kill me. Instead, it turned me into something they could not stop. Something that would return 10 years later to burn their entire world to the ground. Before I tell you how I survived the night that was meant to be my grave, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build a fortress out of the stones people threw at you. My name is Sienna, and at 28 years old, I am a shark in the corporate world. But 10 years ago, I was just a girl hoping her parents finally loved her. The clock on my bedside table flickered to midnight, marking the start of my 18th birthday. I remember staring at the numbers, feeling a foolish spark of hope ignite in my chest. Downstairs, the house was vibrating with music and laughter. I could smell roasted duck truffle oil and the expensive perfumes that my mother Patricia insisted were necessary to mask the scent of our humble beginnings. I smoothed down my dress. It was a simple navy blue cotton dress, the only nice thing I owned, bought 3 years ago from a thrift store. It was tight in the shoulders and frayed at the hem, but I had spent an hour ironing it until it was crisp. I convinced myself the party downstairs was a surprise for me. My parents were strict, cold, and obsessed with their public image, but surely an 18th birthday was a milestone they would acknowledge. I opened my bedroom door and stepped onto the plush carpet of the hallway. The sound of clinking crystal glasses and jazz music floated up the spiral staircase. I took a deep breath and began to descend. I wanted to make an entrance. I wanted to be the daughter they were proud of just for tonight. But as I reached the landing, the scene before me shattered that illusion instantly. The living room was packed with the city's elite. There were councilmen, wealthy donors, and the high-ranking deacons of my father's megachurch. In the center of the room stood a massive 5-tier fondant cake. My heart leaped for a second until I saw the gold icing script swirled across the front. It did not say, "Happy Birthday, Sienna." It read, "Glory to Grace Church Annual Gala." I stood frozen on the stairs, my hand gripping the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. I was invisible. I had always been invisible, but tonight it felt physical, like a blow to the stomach. Then my mother spotted me. Patricia was wearing a silk gown that cost more than my entire existence. Her eyes didn't fill with warmth. They narrowed into slits of pure venom. She marched over to the stairs, her smile fixed for the guests, but her eyes screaming murder. She hissed at me in a low voice that only I could hear. "What do you think you are doing? Get back upstairs. You look like the help." I tried to speak, my voice trembling. "Mom, it is my birthday." I thought maybe. She cut me off with a sharp, stinging slap across my cheek. The sound was masked by the jazz band, but the pain was sharp and hot. Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Look at you. That rag you are wearing is an insult to this family. The mayor is here. Do you want them to think we cannot afford to clothe our children? You are an embarrassment, Sienna. You have always been the stain on this family's perfect image. Now go to your father's study. He has something for you." I swallowed the lump in my throat and turned away from the party. I walked past the kitchen where I saw my younger sister Chantel holding court. She was only 16, but she was draped in diamonds, laughing loudly with a group of boys. She saw me, smirked, and deliberately turned her back. I entered my father's study. The room smelled of aged leather and expensive cigars. My father, Bishop Desmond, was sitting behind his massive oak desk, counting a stack of donation envelopes. He didn't even look up when I entered. "Happy birthday, Dad," I whispered. He finished counting the stack, placed a rubber band around it, and finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, void of any fatherly affection. He didn't smile. He didn't wish me a happy birthday. Instead, he pointed to a battered brown suitcase sitting by the door. It was the old luggage we used to keep in the attic. Legally, you are 18 as of midnight, he said, his voice smooth and practiced the same voice he used to charm thousands of followers on Sunday mornings. The state of Illinois says my obligation to feed, clothe, and house you has officially ended. I stared at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. Dad, what are you talking about? It is snowing outside. He stood up, walking around the desk to loom over me. He was a large man, intimidating and powerful. He picked up a Bible from his desk, but he didn't open it. He just held it like a weapon. Scripture says that if a man will not work, he shall not eat. You have been a leech on my resources for 18 years, Sienna. You are ungrateful, sullen, and you lack the spirit of excellence that this family represents. I need your bedroom. Chantel needs a home gym for her pageant training. He kicked the suitcase toward me. It slid across the floor and hit my foot. I packed your things. Well, the things I decided you could keep. You have 5 minutes to vacate the premises before I call the security team to escort you out for trespassing. Dad, please. I begged, falling to my knees. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. It is 20 degrees below zero. You cannot do this. He looked at me with disgust, as if I were a cockroach on his expensive rug. I suggest you pray, Sienna. Maybe God will find you a shelter. But you are not staying under my roof another night. Now get out. You are ruining the mood of the gala. I dragged the suitcase out the side door, my body shaking not just from the cold, but from pure shock. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, and I heard the distinct click of the deadbolt sliding into place. The silence of the winter night swallowed me whole. The wind was a physical assault. It howled through the trees, cutting through my thin cotton dress like razor blades. I stood on the back porch for a moment, unable to move. My brain couldn't process the cruelty. This had to be a joke. A cruel, sick lesson, but a joke nonetheless. I walked down the long, frozen driveway toward the main gate. The snow was already up to my ankles, soaking into my canvas sneakers, turning my toes into blocks of ice. When I reached the main gate, I realized with horror that it was locked. The electronic keypad was dead. They had cut the power to the gate so I couldn't punch in the code. I was trapped in the yard, exposed to the elements. I saw the glow of a cigarette tip in the darkness near the gatehouse. A figure stepped out from the shadows. It was Hunter. He was Chantel's boyfriend at the time, a 20-year-old college dropout who came from old money. He was handsome in a terrifying way, with ice blue eyes that always looked like they were dissecting you. He was wearing a thick cashmere coat and a scarf, looking perfectly warm. Hunter. I gasped, my teeth chattering so hard I could barely form words. Please. The code. Open the gate. I need to get to the bus station. Hunter took a long drag of his cigarette, the smoke curling up into the freezing air. He didn't move toward the keypad. He just leaned against the stone pillar, smiling. You know, Sienna, I always told your dad you were the resilient one, he said, his voice casual, as if we were discussing the weather. But I don't think anyone is resilient enough for this storm. The forecast says it will hit -25 tonight with the wind chill. Hunter, please. I cried, hugging myself to keep the last bit of warmth from escaping. I am freezing. Just let me out. He chuckled and flicked his cigarette butt into the snow near my feet. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. I can't do that, Sienna. See, strictly speaking, you leaving this property alive is bad for business. What I whispered. He leaned in close, his lips brushing my frozen ear. Desmond took out a policy on you last week. A very generous life insurance policy. $2 million. Double indemnity for accidental death. Like, say, hypothermia during a tragic blizzard. My blood ran cold, colder than the air around me. They didn't just kick me out. They sent me out here to die. This was a premeditated execution. Hunter, you cannot be serious. I stammered, backing away. That is murder. It is an accident, he corrected me, his eyes gleaming with malice. The rebellious daughter ran away in a tantrum and got lost in the storm. It is a tragedy. The church will rally around the grieving family. Donations will skyrocket. And Desmond gets the capital to build that new youth center he has been preaching about. You are finally going to be useful to this family, Sienna. You are worth more dead than you ever were alive. I turned to run, adrenaline flooding my veins, but I was clumsy from the cold. Hunter lunged forward and shoved me hard. I flew backward, landing heavily in a snowdrift. The cold bit into my skin, instantly wet and agonizing. He walked over and kicked my suitcase, sending it skidding across the ice, spilling my meager belongings into the snow. My old sweaters, my notebooks, my underwear, all scattered in the wind. "Make it quick, Sienna," he said, turning back toward the warm, glowing house. "Do us all a favor and just go to sleep. It is peaceful, they say." He walked back up the driveway, whistling a Christmas carol. I watched the lights of the house where I was born, the house where my parents were currently eating cake and shaking hands. Then, one by one, the outdoor floodlights flickered off. They plunged the yard into total darkness. I was alone with the howling wind, the snow piling up around my body, and the realization that the people who were supposed to protect me had just signed my death warrant. I knew I had two choices. I could lie here and give them exactly what they wanted, or I could get up, walk into the dark, and survive just to spite them. I pushed myself up from the snow, my fingers numb and blue, and took the first step toward the fence. They wanted a ghost. I would become a nightmare. The cold was no longer painful. That is the terrifying truth about freezing to death. It starts as 1,000 needles piercing your skin, screaming for warmth, but eventually it settles into a heavy narcotic numbness. I had been walking for what felt like hours, though it might have only been 40 minutes, since I left the iron gates of my parents' estate. The blizzard had erased the world. There were no streetlights, no road signs, just an endless wall of white, swirling violence. My canvas sneakers were soaked through, effectively turning into blocks of ice around my feet. I knew I couldn't make it to the downtown bus station. My body was shutting down. I saw the skeletal frame of an abandoned bus shelter ahead, a relic of a route the city canceled years ago. I stumbled toward it, not for warmth, because the glass panels were shattered, but just to have a place to lie down. I collapsed onto the metal bench, curling into a tight ball. My vision was starting to tunnel. I remembered reading somewhere that in the final stages of hypothermia, people feel a sudden burst of heat and start tearing off their clothes. I wasn't there yet, but the overwhelming urge to sleep was seductive. "Just close your eyes, Sienna, just for a minute. It will all be over." My father's voice echoed in my head, telling me I was worthless. Hunter's laugh played on a loop. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was all I was destined for, a frozen cautionary tale found in a snowbank. Then, through the howling wind, I heard the crunch of tires on snow. Heavy tires. A vehicle was moving slowly, prowling. Hope flared in my chest. Maybe someone had seen me. Maybe my mother had a change of heart. I tried to lift my head, peering through the driving snow. A dark SUV with tinted windows rolled to a stop 10 yards away. It wasn't my parents' car. The engine idled, a low, menacing growl. The passenger door opened and a man stepped out. He was huge, wearing a thick parka, holding a flashlight, and something metallic that looked dangerously like a tire iron. I heard his voice, rough and agitated, carry over the wind. Hunter said she was wearing a blue dress. "Keep looking. The boss pays double if we make sure she doesn't wake up." Adrenaline flooded my system, momentarily fighting back the cold. Hunter hadn't just left me to the elements. He had hired a cleanup crew. He wanted to guarantee that $2 million payout. I shrank back against the graffiti-covered wall of the shelter, praying the darkness would hide me. The beam of the flashlight swept across the snow, inching closer to my hiding spot. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. If they found me, I couldn't fight. I couldn't even stand up. Suddenly, a hand clamped around my ankle. I opened my mouth to scream, but a calloused, gloved hand shot out from the darkness beneath the bench and clamped over my mouth. I looked down in terror. A section of the concrete beneath the bench, a maintenance grate I hadn't even noticed, had been pushed aside. Staring up at me was a face wrapped in layers of wool scarves, with only a pair of sharp, intelligent eyes visible. It was a woman. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like part of the debris. Quiet, she hissed, her voice sounding like grinding stones. Unless you want that tire iron to be the last thing you feel, slide down, now. The flashlight beam hit the edge of the bench. I didn't hesitate. I let my body go limp and slid through the opening in the concrete. The woman caught me with surprising strength, pulling me into the damp darkness. Above us, she reached up and silently slid the heavy metal grate back into place. Seconds later, heavy boots crunched exactly where I had been sitting. "I see footprints," the man's voice echoed from above, muffled by the concrete. "They stop here. The snow covered them up. Check the ravine," another voice shouted from the car. "She probably fell in. Let's go. It is freezing out here." We listened as the car doors slammed and the engine roared away. Only then did I dare to breathe. The air down here was thick, smelling of rust, stagnant water, and old earth, but it was significantly warmer than the blizzard above. We were in a service tunnel, a labyrinth of pipes and steam vents running beneath the city. The woman released me and shuffled back, lighting a small kerosene lantern. The flame flickered, illuminating a makeshift camp. There were piles of newspapers, a sleeping bag raised on milk crates, and stacks of books. This wasn't just a shelter. It was a home. I tried to stop my teeth from chattering. I reached into the pocket of my dress with trembling fingers. I pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, the secret birthday money my grandmother had slipped me a week ago. It was all I had in the world. "Thank you," I stammered, holding the money out to her. "Please, take this. It is all I have." The woman looked at the money, then up at my face. She pulled down her scarf, revealing a face that was weathered by the streets but held a dignity that startled me. Her skin was deep mahogany, lined with hardship, but her eyes were clear and fierce. She laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Child, your paper money is no good in hell, and that is exactly where we are. Put that away before you insult me." She turned to a small camping stove and poured a dark amber liquid from a flask into a tin cup. "Drink this," she ordered. I took the cup. It smelled like cheap whiskey. I hesitated. I had never touched alcohol in my life. My father preached that it was the devil's juice. "Drink it," she barked. "It will dilate your blood vessels. You are going into shock." I gulped it down. It burned my throat like fire, making me cough, but warmth exploded in my stomach, radiating outward to my frozen limbs. I gasped, feeling the blood return to my fingers. "Who are you?" I asked. "Why did you help me?" She sat down on a crate, studying me with an intensity that made me squirm. "They call me Miss Etta. And I didn't save you because I am a saint. I saved you because I hate waste. And watching a smart girl die for a fool's greed is a waste." "How did you know?" I asked. "How did you know they were looking for me?" Miss Etta pointed a crooked finger upward. "I live in the veins of this city, honey. I sleep under the ventilation grates of the rich and holy. Your father's church. The Grace Cathedral. The heating vents from his office lead right into the main tunnel junction. The acoustics are perfect. I hear his sermons, his confessions, and his business deals." My eyes widened. "You heard them?" "I heard Hunter making the call an hour ago," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I heard him tell those men that it had to look like a robbery gone wrong. He said make sure the body isn't found until morning." He was laughing about how he was going to spend his commission on a new condo in the Loop. I felt sick. The whiskey churned in my stomach. I knew they were cruel, but hearing it confirmed by a stranger made it real. They were monsters. "I have to go to the police," I said, trying to stand up. "I have to tell them." "Sit down," Miss Etta snapped. "Police? Who are you? You are a throwaway girl with no coat and alcohol on her breath. And who is your father?" "Bishop Desmond, a pillar of the community, a man who dines with the police chief. You walk into a station tonight and they will call your daddy to come pick you up, and then you really will disappear." I slumped back against the cold pipe. Tears of frustration, hot and angry, streamed down my face. So what do I do? Just die. Just. Miss Etta leaned forward, the lantern light dancing in her eyes. She looked at me not with pity, but with calculation. She saw something in me that I didn't even know existed yet. Yes, she said softly. That is exactly what you do. The girl who walked out of that house tonight, the girl who begs for love from people who hate her, she has to die. She is weak. She is a victim. Tonight, Sienna, you let her freeze in the snow. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was iron. But tomorrow, you wake up, not as their daughter, but as their consequence. You stay down here with me. You disappear. Let them think they won. Let them cash that insurance check. Let them get comfortable. Because when you come back, you won't be coming back for an apology. You will be coming back for everything they own. I looked at this woman, this stranger living in a sewer who knew more about my life than I did. I looked at the dark tunnel stretching out behind her. I realized I had crossed a threshold. The naive girl who wanted a birthday cake was gone. I wiped the tears from my face. I took another sip of the whiskey, letting the burn settle into a cold, hard resolve. Teach me, I whispered. Miss Etta smiled, and for the first time it wasn't scary. It was the smile of a general finding a soldier. Get some sleep, kid, she said. Class starts at dawn. And trust me, the tuition is expensive, but the payoff is going to be legendary. The first month living beneath the city of Chicago was a lesson in gravity. I learned that everything eventually falls down. The rain, the trash, the forgotten receipts, and the people. We lived in the steam tunnels, a labyrinth of concrete and piping that ran like veins under the skin of the metropolis. It was a purgatory of dripping water and the constant rhythmic thrum of the subway trains passing overhead. To the people walking on the sidewalk 20 feet above us, we were invisible. We were ghosts haunting the vents that warmed their expensive leather shoes. But down there in the shadows, I found something more valuable than the warmth of my father's mansion. I found the truth. Miss Etta was not just a homeless woman who knew how to hoard whiskey. She was the queen of this underground kingdom, and I was her only subject. For the first week, I thought she was delusional. She would sit on her milk crate throne reading discarded copies of the Wall Street Journal that she had fished out of recycling bins, muttering about interest rates and bearish markets. She wore fingerless gloves and 3 layers of mismatched coats, but the way she turned the pages of the newspaper was precise, almost elegant. One night, as I was shivering under a thin wool blanket, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger in my stomach, I asked her why she pretended. I asked her why she acted like she understood the complex graphs and stock tickers. Etta looked at me, her eyes flashing in the dim lantern light. She didn't get angry. She just reached into the lining of her coat and pulled out a laminated ID card. It was cracked and faded, but the photo was unmistakable. It was Etta younger, wearing a tailored Chanel suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. Under her name, the title read, Chief Financial Officer, Horizon Logistics. I stared at the card, then at the woman eating beans out of a can. You were a CFO, I whispered. I was the best. She corrected me, her voice sharp. I managed a portfolio of $400 million. I could make money appear out of thin air and make debt vanish like smoke. I was a magician, Sienna. Until I met a young, ambitious real estate developer who needed someone to take the fall for his embezzlement scheme. My stomach dropped. I knew the name before she even said it. Hunter, I breathed. He was charming back then, Etta said, staring into the flame of the camping stove. He needed liquidity for a project that was failing. He moved funds from the employee pension accounts. When the auditors came sniffing, he needed a signature on the transfer orders. He forged mine. He had the best lawyers money could buy. I had a public defender who looked at the color of my skin and told me to take a plea deal. I lost my license. I lost my house. I lost my dignity. I spent 5 years in federal prison, and when I came out, the world had moved on. Hunter was rich, and I was unhireable. That night, the dynamic between us shifted. I stopped seeing her as my savior and started seeing her as my professor. The steam tunnels became my university. My major was revenge. Our days were split into two brutal shifts. During the day, I was invisible. I took the jobs that no one else wanted. I washed dishes in the back of greasy diners where the water was scalding hot, and the soap stripped the skin off my hands. I scrubbed toilets in bus stations, holding my breath against the stench of ammonia and decay. I hauled trash bags behind restaurants, fighting off rats for the best scraps of food to bring back to the tunnel. My back ached constantly. My hands were raw, bleeding, and calloused. I smelled like bleach and exhaustion. To the world, I was just another dropout, a failure, a stain on the sidewalk. But at night, the real work began. When the city slept, Etta and I would sit by the lantern, and she would open my mind. We didn't study literature or history. We studied the anatomy of corruption. Etta taught me that a contract is not a promise, it is a weapon. She taught me how to read the fine print that everyone else ignores. She showed me how to trace shell companies through a maze of offshore registrations. She would smooth out a crumpled receipt from a high-end restaurant that I had found in the trash. "Look at this," she would say, pointing to the timestamp and the tax code. "This isn't just dinner, this is a business expense write-off. If you cross-reference this with their filed quarterly earnings, you can see where they are bleeding money." We turned the tunnel walls into a chalkboard. We used charcoal from burned wood to draw corporate structures, mapping out the flow of money like a general mapping a battlefield. I learned forensic accounting before I learned how to cook a proper meal. I memorized the tax codes of the Cayman Islands. I learned how to spot a Ponzi scheme from a single balance sheet. I remember one night about 6 months in, I was exhausted. I had just finished a 12-hour shift scrubbing floors at a meatpacking plant. I collapsed onto my sleeping bag, closing my eyes. "Get up!" Etta ordered, kicking my boot. "I can't," I groaned. "I am dead, Etta. My hands are shaking." "Your father isn't tired," she said, her voice cutting through the dark. "Hunter isn't tired. They are sleeping in silk sheets right now. They are dreaming about their next vacation. Do you think they care that your hands hurt? Do you think the world pauses because you are weary?" I sat up, fueled by a sudden hot spike of anger. "Here," she said, tossing a heavy book at me. It was a pristine copy of Contract Law Volume 3. I had stolen it from the library of a law firm where I cleaned the windows. Read Chapter 4, the section on irrevocable trusts and acceleration clauses. "But why?" I asked, rubbing my eyes. "Because that is how you are going to take their house," she said simply. "You don't beat them with fists, Sienna. You beat them with paper. You cut them with ink. You strangle them with their own signatures." So I read. I read until my eyes burned and the words swam on the page. I read until the legal jargon became a second language. I stopped dreaming about boys or parties. I started dreaming about litigation and hostile takeovers. Years passed in the dark. I watched the seasons change by the type of debris that washed into the gutters. I went from 18 to 21, then 22. My soft features hardened. The baby fat on my face melted away, replaced by the sharp angles of hunger and determination. I cut my hair short with a jagged pair of scissors, because long hair was a liability in a street fight. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was evolving. The girl who cried in the snow was dead. In her place was a machine built for one purpose. Every toilet I scrubbed, I imagined it was Hunter's face. Every heavy box I lifted, I imagined it was the weight of my father's hypocrisy. I saved every single penny I didn't spend on food. I didn't buy clothes. I didn't buy medicine. I hoarded cash in a rusted coffee tin, buried under loose bricks. One evening, Etta handed me a newspaper clipping. It was an article about a small, struggling logistics company in the south side of Chicago. "It is time for your final exam," she said. I looked at the article. The company was undervalued, drowning in debt, but sitting on a prime piece of real estate near the proposed new railway line. Nobody saw the value because nobody looked at the city planning maps like we did. "What do I do?" I asked. "You take the money in the tin," she said. "You buy a cheap suit from the thrift store. You walk into that bank and you convince them to give you a leverage loan to buy this debt. You don't use your name, you use the name we came up with." I stood up. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was power. "Nemesis Holdings," I said. "Go get them." Etta smiled, showing her gold tooth. "And remember, Sienna, when you walk into that room, you are not the janitor, you are the shark. If they smell blood, make sure it is theirs, not yours." I climbed up the ladder toward the manhole cover, leaving the safety of the tunnel for the first time, not to serve the world, but to conquer it. The sun was blinding when I emerged, but I didn't blink. I was ready to feed. By the time I turned 24, the girl who cried over a birthday cake was dead and buried. In her place stood a woman who saw the world in ticker symbols, leverage ratios, and distress sales. I wasn't just surviving the underground anymore, I was beginning to own the ground above it. Miss Etta had taught me that information was more valuable than gold, and silence was the most expensive commodity of all. We had spent 6 years watching, waiting, and building a profile on the man who tried to kill me. Hunter was arrogant. He moved through the business world like a tank, loud and destructive, assuming that everyone else was too weak to fight back. That was his fatal mistake. He didn't know that a ghost was tracking his every move. My first strike wasn't a physical attack, it was a real estate transaction. Through our network of informants, mostly invisible service workers, that Etta had befriended over the years, I learned that Hunter was desperate to acquire a dilapidated industrial lot on the south side. It was an old steel mill, rusted and abandoned, sitting on 20 acres of contaminated soil. To the average eye, it was an eyesore. But I knew what Hunter knew. The city was secretly planning to extend the railway line right past that lot. If Hunter could buy it cheap and rezone it, he would secure a government logistics contract worth $50 million. He was lowballing the owner, a 70-year-old man named Mr. Henderson, offering him pennies and threatening legal action if he didn't sell. Hunter was squeezing him, waiting for the old man to break. He thought he was the only predator in the water. I checked my bank account. I had $40,000. It was money I had saved by working 3 jobs, eating canned beans, and sleeping on a mattress I found on the street. It was a lot of money for a ghost, but it wasn't enough to buy a steel mill. I needed leverage. I put on my one good suit, a charcoal gray blazer I found at a consignment shop, and walked into the office of a hard money lender in Chinatown. These weren't traditional bankers. They didn't care about credit scores or background checks. They cared about collateral and blood. I looked the lender in the eye and lied. I told him I had a guaranteed buyer lined up. I showed him fake projections Etta and I had forged the night before. I put my entire life savings down as a deposit and signed a promissory note with an interest rate that was borderline illegal. If I failed, I wouldn't just be broke. I would be dead. With the loan secured, I went to Mr. Henderson. I didn't threaten him like Hunter did. I brought him a hot coffee and a cashier's check for the full asking price. I told him I wanted to close in 24 hours. No inspections, no contingencies, just cash and a clean break. The relief on his face was heartbreaking. He signed the deed over to Nemesis Holdings, my anonymous shell company, that very afternoon. The next morning, Hunter arrived at Mr. Henderson's office with his lawyers ready to force the sale. He found an empty desk and a note saying the property was sold. Etta told me later that Hunter threw a chair through the conference room window. He screamed until his face turned purple. He tried to find out who Nemesis Holdings was, but our paper trail was buried under layers of privacy laws and offshore registrations. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was the CEO of Omnicorp, Hunter's biggest competitor. They had been trying to block Hunter's expansion for years. They knew that if Hunter got that land, he would dominate the market. "I heard you own the Henderson lot," the CEO said, his voice clipped and professional. "Name your price. 1.2 million, I said, my voice steady though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Done, he replied. Just like that, the wire transfer hit my account on a Tuesday afternoon. I sat in an internet cafe staring at the screen. $1.2 million. The commas looked beautiful. I was 24 years old and I was a millionaire. Most people my age with that kind of money would have run to the nearest Mercedes dealership. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. I wanted to drive a convertible past my parents' house and honk the horn. I wanted to buy a penthouse and fill it with designer clothes. I wanted to erase the memory of the cold tunnel with expensive heat. But Miss Etta slapped my hand away from the keyboard when I started looking at condos. Wealth is quiet, Sienna, she scolded me. Rich is loud, but wealth is a whisper. You don't spend this money on toys, you spend it on ammunition. We are not done. She was right. I didn't buy a car. I didn't move out of my small, clean apartment in a working-class neighborhood. Instead, I took $50,000 in cash and walked into the office of a private investigator named Reynolds. He was an ex-cop who had been kicked off the force for excessive force and illegal surveillance. He had questionable ethics and steady hands. I put the stack of cash on his desk. "What do you want?" he asked, eyeing the money. "You want me to find a cheating husband?" "No," I said. "I want you to break into a house." I gave him the address, the sprawling estate on the North Shore, my parents' house. "I want ears in every room," I told him. "I want to hear them breathe. I want to know what they say when the guests leave. I want access to their Wi-Fi, their emails, and their landline." Reynolds didn't ask questions. He waited until my family went to their annual summer retreat in Martha's Vineyard. He slipped into the mansion like a shadow. He replaced the smoke detectors with ones containing high-definition cameras and microphones. He put listening devices behind the master bed headboard. He tapped the phone lines in my father's study. When my family returned, they had no idea they were living in a glass house. That night, sitting in my apartment with my headphones on, I adjusted the frequency on the receiver. The static cleared, and suddenly, I was back in the living room I had been kicked out of 6 years ago. The audio was crystal clear. I heard my mother's voice first. She wasn't mourning her missing daughter. She wasn't talking about the tragedy. "Did you see the way the mayor looked at my diamond necklace?" Patricia was saying. "I think he was jealous. We need to upgrade the foyer, Desmond. The marble is looking dated. We can't afford it right now, Patty," my father's voice replied, sounding annoyed. "The church attendance is down. I need to push the new fundraising campaign. Maybe we can use the anniversary of Sienna's disappearance to generate some sympathy donations." I felt a chill run down my spine, colder than any blizzard. They were talking about using my memory to scam their congregation. Then I heard Hunter's voice. He was laughing. "Don't worry about money, Desmond. Once I crush this new competitor who stole the Henderson lot, we will be swimming in cash. I am going to find out who owns Nemesis Holdings, and I am going to bury them." I smiled in the darkness of my room. I took a sip of water, feeling the cool liquid soothe my throat. "Good luck with that, Hunter," I whispered to the empty room. I listened to them for hours. It became my favorite podcast. I learned their passwords. I learned which board members my father was blackmailing. I learned about my sister's secret plastic surgeries. I learned that Hunter was cheating on Chantel with her best friend. That $1 million wasn't my retirement fund. It was my war chest. And the war had just begun. I wasn't just a ghost anymore. I was the monster under their bed, and I had the receipts to prove it. The view from the 45th floor of my penthouse on Billionaire's Row offered a different kind of cold than the one I grew up with. In New York, the cold was sterile. It was the air-conditioned chill of glass and steel, the indifferent silence of a city that bowed to money. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at Central Park, which looked like a small green patch on a Monopoly board. I was 28 years old. To the world, I was the elusive CEO of Nemesis Holdings, a venture capital firm known for its aggressive acquisitions. To myself, I was still the girl in the tunnel, just wearing a better suit. My phone buzzed on the marble island in the kitchen. It was a secure line. Only 2 people had this number. Miss Etta, who was currently managing our assets in Zurich, and Reynolds, the private investigator I had kept on payroll for the last 4 years. I picked it up on the second ring. "Speak," I said, sipping my black coffee. "It is your grandmother," Reynolds said. His voice was gravelly, devoid of professional cushioning. "Rose passed away last night. Massive stroke. She went in her sleep." I froze. The porcelain cup rattled slightly against the saucer as I set it down. Grandma Rose. She was the only person in that house who had ever slipped me a cookie when my mother put me on a diet. She was the one who gave me that $20 bill, the seed money that kept me alive that first night in the sewer. I felt a sharp, jagged crack in the armor I had spent a decade building. Grief tried to rise up hot and blinding, but I shoved it down. I couldn't afford to grieve. Not yet. "I am sorry," Sienna Reynolds continued, "but that is not the only reason I am calling. You need to turn on the television, Channel 5 Chicago. They are streaming it online." "Why?" I asked, walking over to the wall-mounted screen. "Just watch," he said. "They are not wasting any time." I picked up the remote and keyed in the channel. The screen flickered to life, showing the familiar skyline of Chicago, then cut to a live feed from inside Grace Cathedral. My father, Bishop Desmond, was standing at the pulpit. He looked older, heavier, his hair perfectly dyed a raven black that looked unnatural under the studio lights. He was wearing his purple vestments, the color of mourning and royalty. He was crying, or rather he was performing the act of crying. He dabbed at his dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, pausing for dramatic effect as the camera zoomed in. "My brothers and sisters," he boomed, his voice cracking with practiced sorrow. "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. We have lost our matriarch, Mother Rose. But in this time of sorrow, another wound has been reopened. As we prepare to lay my mother to rest, we are also renewing our search for our lost lamb, my daughter Sienna." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. My mother, Patricia, was sitting in the front row, looking down at her lap, her shoulders shaking. Next to her sat Chantel and Hunter, holding hands, looking solemn and grieving. "It has been 10 years," my father continued, looking directly into the camera lens. "10 years since our beloved Sienna wandered away, lost to the streets and her own troubled mind. We have prayed every day for her return. But now, with the passing of her grandmother, we must face reality. We need closure. We are asking the court to officially declare Sienna deceased in absentia, so that her soul may finally be at rest with the Lord, and so that we may honor her grandmother's final wishes regarding the family estate." I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that echoed in the empty penthouse. They weren't looking for closure. They were looking for a death certificate. "Reynolds," I said into the phone, never taking my eyes off Hunter's face on the screen. "Tell me about the will." "It is exactly what we thought," Reynolds replied. "Your grandmother left everything to you, the land, the bonds, the antique collection. It is all in a trust that unlocks when you turn 25 or upon her death. But if you are declared dead, the trust dissolves and the assets revert to the next of kin. That is Desmond and Patricia. And Hunter needs that money to plug the hole in his balance sheet I finished for him." "Exactly," Reynolds said. "They filed the petition this morning. They are rushing the judge to sign the order of presumed death before the funeral on Friday. They want to bury you and your grandmother in the same week." I ended the call and immediately dialed another number. My executive assistant Sarah picked up instantly. "Good morning, Ms. Brooks," she said. "Clear my schedule for the week I ordered," walking into my walk-in closet. I pulled down a black garment bag. It contained a dress I had bought in Paris years ago, saving it for a special occasion. I didn't think that occasion would be my own resurrection. "Cancel the Tokyo meeting. And call the airport. Fuel up the Gulf Stream. We are going to Chicago." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said, her voice professional and unshakable. "Should I book a hotel?" "No," I said. "I won't be staying long enough to sleep. But Sarah, get me the acquisition team on the line. I want to make a purchase before Wheels Up. "What are we buying?" she asked. "I want you to call the First National Bank of Illinois. I want to buy the mortgage debt on the Grace Cathedral and the personal liens against the Brooks family estate. Offer them 110 cents on the dollar. I want to be the sole holder of their debt by the time I land." There was a pause on the other end. Buying the debt meant I became their bank. I could foreclose on them if they missed a single payment. And I knew for a fact, thanks to Eda's auditing, that they had missed the last three. "Consider it done," Sarah said. I hung up and grabbed a thick leather folder from my safe. On the cover, in bold red letters, was the name of Hunter's passion project, Eden Gardens. Inside were the geological surveys, the bribed safety inspections, and the fraudulent loan applications. It was a bomb waiting to detonate. I walked to the elevator, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. The girl who had begged for her life at the gate was gone. The woman staring back had eyes like flint and a heart that pumped liquid nitrogen. My father wanted his lost lamb to come home. He wanted a ghost. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. "Be careful what you pray for, Dad," I whispered as the doors slid shut. "Because I am coming home. And I am bringing hell with me." The organ music swelled, filling the vaulted ceiling of Grace Cathedral with a heavy, mournful sound that felt entirely manufactured. I stood in the vestibule just outside the massive oak doors, listening to the performance inside. And it was a performance. My father, Bishop Desmond, never missed an opportunity to turn a tragedy into a transaction. Through the crack in the doors, I could hear his voice booming over the microphone, practiced and velvety, the same voice that had convinced thousands of people to empty their savings accounts into his collection plates. He was talking about my grandmother Rose, but as usual, the sermon had quickly pivoted to himself. He spoke of the burden of leadership. He spoke of the heavy heart of a father who had lost not only a mother, but a daughter. He was weaving a narrative so thick with lies, it was practically suffocating the congregation. I adjusted the cuffs of my black blazer. It was custom-made in Milan, sharp enough to cut glass. My shoes were Louboutin, the red soles, a hidden signal of danger. I wasn't just dressed for a funeral, I was dressed for a hostile takeover. Behind me, my two security detail officers, large men named Marcus and Stone, who used to work for Special Forces, stood ready. They weren't there to protect me from the crowd. They were there to protect my family from me. "Open them," I whispered. The heavy doors groaned as they were pushed open, flooding the dim sanctuary with sudden blinding daylight from the vestibule. The organist faltered, hitting a dissonant key that rang out like a scream. The silence that followed was absolute. 500 heads turned simultaneously. I didn't rush. I walked. One step, then another. The sound of my heels on the marble floor was a rhythmic military cadence. Click, click, click. I kept my sunglasses on. I walked down the center aisle, the same aisle where my father had envisioned walking me down for a wedding to some wealthy donor's son. Now I was walking it alone, and I owned every inch of it. I saw the faces of the congregation. These were people who had watched me grow up. People who had turned a blind eye when I showed up to Sunday school with bruises on my arms, or when I wore the same coat for 3 winters straight. They stared at me now with a mixture of confusion and awe. They didn't recognize the woman in the power suit. They were looking for the scared, mousy teenager who used to sit in the back row. That girl was gone. As I neared the front, I saw them. The front pew. The VIP section. My mother Patricia was dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, looking every bit the grieving matriarch. When she saw me, her hand froze in midair. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was as if she were seeing a ghost, which in a legal sense was exactly what she was hoping for. Next to her sat Hunter, my brother-in-law, the man who had left me to freeze. He looked different after 10 years. He was heavier, his face puffy from expensive scotch and easy living. When he locked eyes with me, the color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He gripped the back of the pew in front of him, his knuckles turning white. He knew. In that split second, he knew that the insurance payout, the land deal, the millions of dollars he was banking on it, had all just evaporated. And then there was Chantel, my sister, the golden child. She was wearing a black dress that was inappropriate for a funeral, cut low to show off her chest, accessorized with diamond jewelry that I knew was bought on credit. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing in recognition. But then her gaze dropped. She wasn't looking at my face. She was looking at my hand. I was carrying a Hermes Himalaya Birkin bag. It was made of Nile crocodile hide dyed to resemble the snowy mountains. It was one of the rarest handbags in the world, worth more than $300,000. It was worth more than the car she drove. It was worth more than the remodeling job on her kitchen. I saw the calculation in her eyes. I saw the jealousy flare up hot and instant, overriding even her shock at my return. She didn't care that her sister was alive. She cared that her sister was winning. I reached the pulpit. My father was standing there, his hands raised in a gesture of benediction that looked more like surrender. He was staring at me, blinking rapidly, his script forgotten on the podium. The security guard, a church volunteer named Deacon Phillips, stepped forward to block me. He put a hand out, his face stern. "Miss, you cannot be up here. This is a private service." Stone, my bodyguard, stepped forward. He didn't touch the deacon. He just moved into his space, a wall of muscle and silent threat. The deacon looked at Stone, then at me, and wisely stepped back into the shadows. I walked up the 3 steps to the pulpit. My father backed away, clutching his microphone like a shield. "Sienna," he whispered, his voice trembling. This was not the reunion he had preached about. This was an ambush. I reached out and gently took the microphone from his hand. He didn't resist. He was too paralyzed by the sudden shift in power. I turned to face the congregation. I took off my sunglasses, revealing eyes that were dry, clear, and utterly cold. I looked at the cameras streaming live to the internet. I looked at the bankers sitting in the 3rd row. I looked at the board members. Then I looked at my father. "You are crying so loud, Dad," I said, my voice amplified through the massive speakers, crisp and steady. "I could hear you all the way down in hell." So I decided to wake up. A gasp rippled through the room. It sounded like the air being sucked out of the building. My father tried to recover. He put on his best benevolent smile, though it twitched at the corners. "My daughter. My lost lamb. The Lord has returned her to us." "This is a miracle." I laughed. It was a soft, chilling sound. "Save the sermon, Desmond," I said, dropping the title of Dad. "I am not here for a miracle, and I am certainly not here to be a prop in your fundraising campaign." I reached into my bag, the crocodile leather cool under my fingers, and pulled out a folded document. I held it up for the room to see. I was watching the broadcast in the car. I continued. "You were just telling these good people that you need to open Grandma Rose's trust fund to build a youth center in her honor. That you need me declared dead to access those funds for the greater good." I turned to the congregation, locking eyes with the head of the church board. "But we all know that is not true, don't we? Because I am holding the deed to this church." Hunter stood up, knocking over a hymnal. "You are lying," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Sit down, Sienna. You are mentally unstable. Someone get her out of here." I didn't even look at him. I just signaled to Marcus, my other bodyguard, who tapped a few buttons on a tablet he was holding. Suddenly, the giant projection screens behind the choir loft, which usually displayed hymn lyrics, flickered and changed. A spreadsheet appeared. It was complex, but the highlighted columns were easy to understand. "This is the church's financial ledger," I explained, pointing to the screen. "And these highlighted transactions show $5 million being transferred over the last 3 years to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Virtue Ventures." I looked at Hunter then. "Virtue Ventures is registered to you, Hunter." The room erupted. People stood up shouting. The choir members looked at each other in confusion. My mother slumped back in her seat, fanning herself frantically. I turned back to the microphone. I bought the mortgage on this building this morning, I announced, my voice cutting through the chaos. And since this church has defaulted on its payments for 6 months while my brother-in-law siphoned the money for his gambling debts, I am technically the new owner. I looked at my father. He looked small. The grandeur of his robes suddenly looked like a cheap costume. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, I said. I am turning this building into a shelter for the homeless youth you refuse to help. And Grandma Rose's trust. It stays with me. I placed the microphone back on the podium with a thud. I didn't wait for a reaction. I turned and walked down the steps, my bodyguards falling into formation behind me. I walked past my family. Chantel was crying, but she was staring at my bag. Her eyes filled with a greedy, desperate hunger. Hunter was on his phone, likely calling a lawyer who wouldn't be able to save him. My mother wouldn't look at me. I walked back up the aisle, the sound of my heels the only steady rhythm in a room descending into anarchy. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could hear the sound of their empire crumbling behind me, and it was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The conference room at Sterling and Finch smelled like lemon polish and old lies. It was situated on the 30th floor with a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, a view that usually cost $500 an hour to look at. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, looking small and overwhelmed. That was the role I had to play. To them, I was still the shivering girl in the snow, the dropout, the failure who had miraculously stumbled back into their lives. They had no idea that I had negotiated mergers in rooms twice this size, with men twice as intimidating as their family lawyer, Mr. Sterling. My mother, Patricia, refused to look at me. She was busy examining her manicure, sighing loudly every few seconds to signal her distress. My father, Desmond, sat with his hands clasped in prayer, though I knew he was praying for my signature, not my soul. Chantel was texting under the table, probably updating her followers about the emotional toll of this family reunion. And then there was Hunter. He sat directly across from me, his legs spread wide, radiating a toxic mix of arrogance and impatience. Mr. Sterling slid a heavy document across the polished wood. It stopped inches from my hands. Sienna. Mr. Sterling began, his voice dripping with condescending syrup. We understand that your return has been confusing for everyone. Your parents want to make sure you are taken care of. They want to help you get back on your feet. I looked down at the document. It was a quitclaim deed and a waiver of inheritance rights. In exchange for permanently severing my claim to Grandma Rose's estate, the Grace Cathedral land, and any future family assets, I would receive a one-time payment. I looked at the number, $50,000. I tried to suppress the laugh that wanted to bubble up in my throat. $50,000. That was less than the cost of the earrings Chantel was wearing right now. It was an insult. It was a crumb thrown to a starving dog. But I didn't laugh. Instead, I let my lower lip tremble. I hunched my shoulders, making myself look smaller, more pathetic. Is this all of it? I stammered, keeping my voice low and shaky. Grandma told me she wanted me to have the house. Hunter leaned forward, the leather of his chair creaking. The mask of the concerned brother-in-law slipped, revealing the predator underneath. Don't be greedy, Sienna, Hunter snapped. You have been gone for 10 years. You didn't care about Grandma Rose when she was sick. You were out on the streets doing God knows what. We took care of her. We paid the bills. This 50 grand is a gift. It is more than you deserve. My father nodded solemnly. Hunter is right, Sienna. We are trying to be generous here. We want you to have a fresh start. Somewhere else. Somewhere far away where you can heal. Meaning somewhere where I wouldn't be a liability to their reputation. I reached out and touched the pen, my fingers shaking visibly. I was buying time. Inside my left ear, hidden by my hair, was a microscopic earpiece. I was waiting for a signal. 3 blocks away, sitting in a van filled with server racks. Miss Etta was currently brute forcing her way into the encrypted servers of Hunter's construction company, Virtue Ventures. She needed 10 minutes to bypass the firewall and download the original geological surveys for the Eden Gardens project, the ones that proved the land was unstable and that Hunter knew it. I picked up the pen and then dropped it. It clattered loudly on the table. "I am sorry," I whispered, reaching for it. I am so nervous." "Oh, for God's sake," Patricia hissed. "Just sign the paper, Sienna. Stop making a scene." I picked up the pen again. I looked at the document. I pretended to read the legal jargon, moving my lips like a child trying to understand big words. In reality, I was scanning the clauses with the precision of a corporate raider. Clause 4, Section B, immediate forfeiture of all claims. Clause 9, non-disclosure agreement regarding family matters. They had covered their bases, or so they thought. "I need some water," I said, my voice barely audible. "My throat is dry." Mr. Sterling sighed, clearly annoyed, and poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe. I took it with both hands, sipping slowly, watching the clock on the wall. 7 minutes had passed. "Come on, Etta." Hunter slammed his hand down on the table. I jumped, spilling a little water on the wood. Patricia gasped, concern for the furniture. "Enough of this act," Hunter growled. He stood up and walked around the table until he was standing right behind me. He leaned down, his mouth close to my ear, his voice a low, menacing whisper that the lawyer pretended not to hear. "Listen to me, you little rat. You think you can just waltz back in here with a fancy bag and scare us? I know you rented that Hermes bag. I know you are broke. You are just a beggar who got lucky and found a suit." I felt his hand grip the back of my chair, squeezing hard. "You are going to sign that paper, Sienna, and then you are going to take that cash and disappear. If you don't, if you try to fight us, well, the city is a dangerous place. People go missing all the time, especially girls with no history. You disappeared once. I can make sure you disappear again, and this time nobody will find you in a snowbank." The threat was visceral. It brought back the freezing cold of that night 10 years ago. But this time the cold didn't scare me. It fueled me. I looked up at him, widening my eyes in feigned terror. "Please, Hunter, I don't want any trouble." "Then sign," he commanded. Suddenly, a soft double click sounded in my earpiece. It was the signal. Etta was in. She had the files. The data that proved Hunter was defrauding investors and building on a sinkhole was now sitting on our secure cloud drive. I took a deep breath, letting out a shaky exhale. "Okay," I said, a tear leaking out of my eye for effect. "I will sign. I just want to go." "Good girl," Desmond said, relaxing back into his chair. I pressed the pen to the paper. The black ink flowed smoothly. I wrote my name on the signature line. But I didn't write Sienna Marie Brooks, my legal name as stated on my birth certificate and the trust documents. I wrote Sienna Maria Brooks. It was a subtle difference. An A instead of an E. In the eyes of the law, a contract signed with an incorrect legal name, especially under duress, was contestable. But more importantly, without the correct middle name matching the trust registry, this waiver was just a piece of paper with ink on it. It was void. I finished the signature with a flourish and put the pen down. "There," I said, pushing the document away as if it burned me. Hunter snatched the paper up immediately. He didn't check the spelling. He was too arrogant. He saw a signature, and he saw victory. He saw his millions secured. He saw his secrets buried. Mr. Sterling quickly notarized it, stamping it with a heavy thud that sounded like a gavel. "Excellent," the lawyer said, closing his folder. "We will have the check issued to you within 48 hours. I stood up, grabbing my bag. My legs felt steady now. The trembling was gone. "Can I go now?" I asked, looking at my parents. Desmond waved his hand dismissively. "Go. And Sienna, don't come to the house. We will mail the check to wherever you are staying." I walked to the door. My hand touched the cold brass handle. I paused and turned back to look at them one last time. They were already celebrating. Hunter was high-fiving my father. Chantel was smiling. They looked like vultures feasting on a carcass, unaware that the meat was poisoned. "Thank you, family," I said softly. "You have given me everything I need." Hunter looked up confused by my tone. It wasn't the voice of a defeated victim. It was the voice of the executioner. "What did you say?" he asked. "Goodbye, Hunter," I said. I walked out of the office and into the hallway. As the heavy door clicked shut behind me, the facade dropped. I straightened my spine. I wiped the fake tear from my cheek. I tapped my earpiece. "Did you get it, Etta?" I asked. "I got everything." Baby girl Etta's voice crackled in my ear, sounding like pure gold. "I have the soil reports, the bribed inspector emails, and the bank transfers. We own him." I smiled, walking toward the elevator. I didn't need their $50,000. I was about to foreclose on their entire lives. The game of cat and mouse was over. Now it was time for the slaughter. The prime rib on my father's plate was rare, swimming in a pool of juice that looked disturbingly like blood against the white bone china. The dining room of the Brooks estate hadn't changed in 10 years. It still smelled of beeswax polish and old money, or at least the illusion of it. The crystal chandelier above us cast a fractured, glittering light over the table, illuminating the family that had tried to erase me. We were eating a dinner that cost more than my first year's rent in the city, celebrating the fact that they had successfully swindled me out of my inheritance. Or so they thought. I sat at the side of the table, the spot usually reserved for guests of lower importance. My mother Patricia sat opposite my father, presiding over the meal like a queen who was afraid her crown was slipping. Chantel and Hunter sat across from me, looking like a power couple from a magazine advertisement. If the magazine was dedicated to narcissism and bad debt. "So Sienna," Chantel said, breaking the silence. She twirled her fork around a piece of asparagus, looking at me with eyes that were glazed over with wine and malice. "What are you going to do with your little $50,000 check? I assume that is a lot of money for someone like you. Maybe you can finally fix your teeth, or buy a wardrobe that doesn't look like it came from a funeral home." I took a slow sip of the Cabernet. It was a 2015 vintage decent, but I knew my father had charged it to the church's communion wine budget. "I haven't decided yet," I said calmly, setting the glass down. "Maybe I will invest it." Chantel laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Invest it? Oh, that is cute. Did you hear that, Hunter? She thinks she is a stockbroker now. Sienna, honey, you don't invest 50 grand. You use it to pay off your credit cards, or maybe get a decent apartment so you don't have to live in whatever hole you crawled out of." She turned to Hunter, placing a hand on his forearm, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. "Speaking of investments, babe, tell her about my new car." Hunter smiled, slicing his meat with aggressive precision. "It is nothing, really. Just a little gift for my wife." "Nothing," Chantel squealed. "It is the new Range Rover Autobiography. Custom black matte finish. Heated massage seats. It cost $160,000. It is sitting in the driveway right now. You probably walked past it, Sienna." "Did you see it?" "I did," I said. "It is very large." "It is magnificent," Chantel corrected me. "It screams success, but I guess you wouldn't know much about that." "What do you drive, Sienna?" "Still taking the bus," I smiled. I didn't mention the Bentley Continental GT parked in my private garage in New York, or the private jet that was currently being refueled at O'Hare. "I prefer to walk," I said. "It keeps me grounded." "But that is a beautiful truck, Chantel. 160,000. That is a heavy liability." I leaned forward slightly, resting my chin on my hand, looking at her with innocent curiosity. "Is the car in your name, or did Hunter buy it through the company?" The table went quiet. The only sound was the scraping of my father's knife against the porcelain. Chantel blinked, confused by the specific nature of the question. "What does that matter?" she asked, frowning. "It is my car. Hunter bought it for me." "My mother." Patricia let out a loud, exasperated sigh. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. "Sienna, please." she scolded, her voice dripping with disdain. Eat your dinner. Don't ask questions about things you couldn't possibly understand. High finance and corporate assets are a little above your pay grade. We don't want to give you a headache. I picked up my knife, mirroring Hunter's movements. I didn't look at my mother. I kept my eyes locked on Hunter. I was just curious, Mom, I said, keeping my voice light and conversational. I read an article recently about piercing the corporate veil. You see, if the car is purchased under Virtue Ventures to write off the taxes, then technically it is a commercial asset. I cut into my potato. And if the company were to, say, face a liquidity crisis or a federal audit for fraud, the creditors could seize the commercial assets first. I would hate to see Chantel driving down the highway and get pulled over by a repo man because the company missed a loan payment. That would be so embarrassing for the family image. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with tension. Hunter stopped chewing. He slowly lowered his fork to the plate. The clatter echoed in the room. He turned his head slowly to look at me. His eyes were no longer mocking. They were dark, assessing, and dangerous. For a man who had just supposedly swindled a naive girl, he looked remarkably unsettled. He knew that the term liquidity crisis wasn't something a janitor or a street hustler would use casually. He knew that Virtue Ventures was currently leveraging debt to pay off older debt. He knew the house of cards was shaking, and I had just blown a breath of cold air right at the base. What do you know about my company's liquidity? Hunter asked. His voice was low, a growl that was meant to intimidate. I shrugged, taking a bite of the potato. Nothing really. Just what I hear on the news. The economy is tough for everyone, isn't it? Even for big developers. I just want to make sure my sister is protected. It would be a shame if she lost her heated massage seats just because of some bad accounting. Chantel looked from me to Hunter, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, but not understanding it. Hunter, what is she talking about? She whined. The company is fine, right? We are rich. Of course we are fine. Hunter snapped at her, never taking his eyes off me. Your sister is just jealous. She is trying to scare you because she is going back to a life of poverty while you are driving a tank. He picked up his wine glass, draining it in one gulp. He slammed it back down on the coaster. You have a big mouth for someone who just signed away her rights, Hunter said to me. You should be careful, Sienna. Accidents happen to people who ask too many questions. I met his gaze unflinching. My face remained a mask of polite confusion, but my eyes were screaming a challenge. I am always careful, Hunter, I said softly. That is how I survived the blizzard. Remember. Patricia clapped her hands together, a sharp, jarring sound meant to restore order to her perfect dinner party. Stop it, both of you, she commanded. This is a celebration. Sienna, stop talking nonsense about repo men. It is tacky. Hunter, pour me more wine. We are celebrating the expansion of the church and the bright future of this family. Hunter poured the wine, his hand shaking slightly. A single drop of red liquid spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like a fresh wound. I watched it stain the fabric. So, Dad, I said, turning to the bishop, shifting the target. How is the fundraising going for the new youth center? I bet the donation from Grandma Rose's trust will really help kickstart the project. Desmond smiled, his ego instantly stroked. Oh, it is going marvelously, Sienna. The Lord is providing. We have big plans. A gymnasium, a computer lab. It will be a legacy. And I assume the contractors have already been selected, I asked. Let me guess. Virtue Ventures. Desmond nodded, oblivious to the trap. Well, naturally. We like to keep the blessings within the family. Hunter gave us a very competitive bid. Of course he did, I said. I looked at Hunter again. He was pale. He knew that using charitable funds for a construction project run by a family member required strict disclosures to the IRS. He also knew he hadn't filed them. You know, I continued, leaning back in my chair. It is funny, I walked past the site of the proposed center on my way here. It is still just a hole in the ground. But according to the church bulletin I saw online, you broke ground 2 years ago. Where did all the initial donations go, Dad? Desmond's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Delays, he stammered. Permits. Red tape. You know how the city is. I do, I said. I know exactly how the city is. I checked my watch. It was 8:30. In exactly 12 hours, the automated purchase order I had set up with the bank would execute. I would own the mortgage on this house. I would own the loan on Chantel's car. And I would own the debt on the church. This dinner was indeed a celebration, but they were the turkey and I was the one holding the carving knife. The food is delicious, Mom, I said, offering her a genuine smile for the first time. Enjoy it. Really, savor every bite. Because tomorrow, I thought to myself, you are going to choke on it. The chocolate lava cake had been cleared away, leaving only the heavy silence of secrets hanging over the table. My father, Desmond, was picking his teeth with a silver toothpick, looking satisfied with his performance as the benevolent patriarch. My mother, Patricia, was scrolling through her phone, likely checking to see if anyone had tagged the family in photos from the dinner. They thought they had won. They thought the signed waiver in Hunter's jacket pocket was their golden ticket to keeping their empire of lies intact. Hunter stood up, walking over to the sidebar, where a decanter of dark red wine sat. He had been eyeing it for the last 10 minutes. His movements were stiff, unnatural. He picked up the crystal decanter and turned to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We should have one last toast, Hunter said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. To bury the hatchet, to Sienna's new life, wherever that may be. He poured a glass for me first. I watched him closely. His body blocked my view of the glass, but I saw the slight tremor in his elbow. I saw the way he hesitated for a fraction of a second before turning around. He handed me the glass. The liquid was a deep, opaque crimson. For you, Sienna, he said. It is a 1998 Bordeaux. Very rare. Thank you, Hunter, I said, taking the glass by the stem. He poured glasses for everyone else, but he poured them from a different bottle, a lighter Pinot Noir that was already open on the table. Wait, I said, holding up my hand. Why am I drinking the Bordeaux and everyone else is drinking the Pinot? Hunter froze. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. I just wanted to give you the best, he stammered. A parting gift. The rest of us are already drinking the Pinot. I didn't want to mix varietals. I smiled. You are so thoughtful. Suddenly, Miss Etta's voice crackled in my ear, sharp and urgent. Do not drink that, Sienna. The thermal camera on the drone shows a heat signature difference in his pocket. He just dropped a soluble sedative into that glass. It is likely a high dose of benzodiazepines mixed with something else. If you drink that and get behind the wheel of a car, you will wrap your vehicle around a telephone pole before you leave the subdivision. I held the glass up to the light. It looked innocent enough. But to me, it looked like a loaded gun. Chantel let out a loud groan. Oh my God, look at this lighting. I look terrible. Hunter, come take a picture with me. I need to post something to prove we are having a family dinner. Hunter looked at her, annoyed. Not now, Chantel. We are toasting. Just one picture, she whined. She pulled out her phone and stood up, adjusting her dress. She walked over to the large mirror on the dining room wall, turning her back to the table to check her reflection. Hunter turned to look at her, exasperated. Jesus, Chantel. Sit down. In that split second, while Hunter's back was turned and my parents were looking at Chantel, I moved. My hand was a blur. I switched my glass with Chantel's glass, which was sitting half-empty next to her plate. It was a seamless motion practiced 100 times in the tunnel with cups of water. Chantel turned back around, oblivious. She grabbed her glass, not noticing it was slightly fuller than before, or that the wine was a shade darker. She held it up. Fine. Let us toast. To me getting my new car. And to Sienna leaving. Hunter raised his glass, his eyes fixed on me. Cheers. I raised the glass of Pinot Noir I had stolen from Chantel. Cheers, I said. I watched Chantel take a massive gulp of the poisoned wine. She didn't just sip it, she downed half the glass. Hunter watched me. He waited until I brought the rim to my lips and tilted my head back. I let the liquid touch my lips, but I didn't swallow. I faked a swallow, then set the glass down. Hunter let out a breath he had been holding. He smiled a genuine, cruel smile. He thought I was a walking dead woman. The effects were rapid. Etta had been right. Whatever cocktail he had mixed was potent. Within 5 minutes, Chantel's eyes started to lose focus. She slumped slightly in her chair, a goofy grin spreading across her face. Whoa! She giggled, her words slurring. This wine hit me fast. Is the room spinning? Hunter frowned. You barely drank anything, babe. You are just tired. I am not tired, Chantel argued, her voice getting louder and looser. I feel floaty. Like that time we went to Vegas. Remember Vegas, Hunter? Hunter's eyes widened. He stood up. Okay, I think Chantel needs to go to bed. Sit down, Hunter, I said, my voice sharp. She is just having fun. Let her talk. Chantel pointed a limp finger at Hunter and laughed. You were so funny in Vegas. You kept calling that waitress. What was her name? Jessica. No, Jennifer. Hunter rushed to her side, grabbing her arm. Chantel, stop it. You are drunk. We are going upstairs. No. Chantel screamed, pulling her arm away with surprising strength. I don't want to go upstairs. I want to tell them about Jessica. My mother looked scandalized. Chantel, lower your voice. Who is Jessica? Chantel turned to our mother, her head lolling to the side. Jessica is his secretary mom, the one with the big eyes. Hunter bought her a bracelet. Cartier. Just like mine. The room went dead silent. My father stopped chewing. Patricia looked at Hunter, her mouth agape. Hunter's face was a mask of pure terror. Not because his affair was out, but because he realized what was happening. He looked at Chantel's glass. Then he looked at mine. Realization hit him like a physical blow. He looked at me, his eyes screaming the question. I just smiled and took a sip of the Pinot Noir. She is lying, Hunter yelled, his voice cracking. She is hallucinating. She is sick. I am not sick, Chantel mumbled, laying her head down on the table. I saw the texts. I saw the pictures. You said she understands you better than I do. You said I was just a trophy. She started to cry, loud, ugly sobs that echoed in the dining room. You said you only married me because Dad has the church connections. You said my family is a bunch of hypocrites. Hunter grabbed Chantel by the shoulders and shook her violently. Shut up, Chantel. Shut up right now. I tapped the brooch on my lapel. It was a high-fidelity microphone. Did you get that? Etta, I whispered. Loud and clear, Etta replied. Adultery. Check. Admission of using the family for business connections. Check. And judging by his reaction, he knows exactly why she is blabbing. That is a sedative overdose, Sienna. He poisoned his own wife. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor drew everyone's attention. Hunter, I said, my voice calm and authoritative. You should probably call 911. Why? He snarled, trying to hold Chantel upright as she started to slide off the chair. Because judging by the dilation of her pupils and her rapid loss of motor function, I would say she has ingested a significant amount of sedatives. And since she only drank the wine you poured, I wonder how that happened. Hunter froze. He looked at me with pure hatred. You, he whispered. You switched them. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. Patricia stood up, screaming. What is happening? Is she dying? Hunter, what did you give her? I didn't give her anything. Hunter yelled, panic taking over. It was meant for... He stopped. He caught himself just in time. But it was too late. My father heard it. My mother heard it. It was meant for who, Hunter? I asked, stepping closer. It was meant for me, wasn't it? You wanted me to fall asleep at the wheel. You wanted another tragic accident to solve your problems. Hunter let go of Chantel and she slumped onto the floor unconscious. You are a monster, he hissed at me. No, Hunter, I said, picking up my purse. I am just a mirror. I reflect what you give me. You gave me poison. I just redirected it. I walked over to where Chantel lay. She was breathing shallowly, but she was alive. She will be fine after a stomach pump, I said to my mother, who was kneeling beside her sobbing, but I would call the ambulance fast. And Hunter, I wouldn't worry about the affair. I think you are going to have much bigger problems to deal with tonight. I turned and walked toward the front door. Behind me, the chaos was absolute. My mother was screaming at the operator. My father was shouting at Hunter. And Hunter was standing there staring at the empty glass, realizing that he had just handed me the final nail for his coffin. I stepped out into the cool night air. The wind was gentle, nothing like the blizzard of the past. I took a deep breath. It smelled like victory. I tapped my earpiece. Send the police to the house, Etta. Tell them there has been an attempted poisoning. And send the audio file of Chantel's confession to the church board members. I think they deserve to know who their contractor really is. On it, Etta said. I walked down the long driveway past the black Range Rover that Chantel was so proud of. I ran my key along the side of it, leaving a long, deep scratch in the matte paint. Petty, maybe. But I was just getting started. The morning sun glinted off the row of gold-plated shovels lined up in the frozen dirt. Hunter had spared no expense for the groundbreaking ceremony of Eden Gardens. A large white tent had been erected to shield the VIP investors from the biting Chicago wind, and inside, waiters were circulating with trays of hot espresso and pastries. It was a scene of manufactured success. My father, Desmond, was shaking hands with the city councilman, looking important. My mother was showing off her fur coat to the wife of a bank executive, and there, standing at the podium with a smile that looked like it had been surgically attached, was Hunter. I watched from the tinted window of a black Escalade parked just outside the security perimeter. Beside me, Miss Etta was monitoring the stock market on her tablet. It is time, Etta said, her voice calm. The market just opened. Virtue Ventures is trading at $42 a share. Not for long, I replied. I opened the car door and stepped out. The cold air hit my face, but I didn't flinch. I was wearing a white wool coat that looked like armor, pristine against the muddy backdrop of the construction site. Marcus and Stone flanked me as we marched toward the tent. Hunter was in the middle of his speech. This 50-story luxury tower will not just be a residence, he boomed into the microphone. It will be a monument to the future, a testament to what happens when vision meets faith. We have already sold 60% of the units pre-construction. The crowd applauded politely. Hunter beamed, looking at my parents for approval. But vision is nothing without a solid foundation, I said, my voice projecting clearly as I walked into the tent. The applause died instantly. Hunter looked up, his smile faltering. The security guards started to move toward me, but they stopped when they saw the size of my bodyguards. Sienna, Hunter hissed, gripping the podium. What are you doing here? I told you to stay away. This is a private event for investors. I am aware, I said, walking up the center aisle. The investors parted like the Red Sea, sensing the tension. I walked right up to the front row, where the representatives from the investment banks were sitting. And that is exactly why I am here, Hunter. As the majority shareholder of Nemesis Holdings, I believe I have a right to inspect my investment. Hunter laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. Nemesis Holdings? What are you talking about? Nemesis is an offshore capital firm. You are broke, Sienna. You signed the waiver yesterday for 50 grand. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a thick legal document. I didn't hand it to Hunter. I handed it to the man sitting in the front row, Mr. Sterling, the same lawyer who had tried to bully me the day before. Read the incorporation papers, Mr. Sterling, I said. Nemesis Holdings is a sole proprietorship, owned by Sienna Maria Brooks, and as of this morning, Nemesis owns 80% of the debt financing for this project. Mr. Sterling flipped through the pages, his face turning pale. He looked up at Hunter and nodded slowly. It is true, Hunter. She owns the paper. She is your primary lender. Hunter looked like he had been punched in the gut. But that is impossible. You are a nobody. I ignored him and turned to the crowd of investors. Gentlemen, I said, raising my voice. You were told that Eden Gardens sits on prime bedrock, perfect for a skyscraper. You were shown geological surveys that promise stability. I signaled to Marcus, who set up a large architectural display board on an easel next to me. I ripped off the cover sheet. This is the actual geological survey from the city archives dating back to 1950. The board showed a map of the land heavily shaded in blue. This land isn't bedrock, I explained, pointing to the map. It is a Class 4 wetland. It consists of 20 feet of peat moss and unstable clay. If you build a 50-story tower here, it won't stand for 5 years. It will sink. A murmur of alarm went through the tent. The bankers started whispering to each other. "She is lying!" Hunter screamed, his face turning crimson. "That map is outdated. We did new tests." "Did you?" I asked. "Or did you pay a bribe to an inspector who has since been indicted for fraud?" I flipped the board over to reveal a second chart. And there is one more thing. Because this is a designated wetland, the City Zoning Commission has this area marked as a flood retention pond. I paused for effect, letting the words sink in. "You cannot build condos here, Hunter. You can only build a swamp." The reaction was immediate chaos. The investors stood up, pulling out their phones. I heard shouts of anger. "Is this true?" One man yelled at Hunter. "Is this land unbuildable?" Hunter stammered, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold. No, we can drain it. We can get a variance." "You can't drain a federal wetland," I said coldly. Hunter ran down from the podium, grabbing my arm. "You set me up," he whispered, his eyes wide with madness. "You knew." I pulled my arm away, dusting off the sleeve of my coat. "I didn't set you up, Hunter. I just sold you what you wanted to buy." Hunter froze. His brain finally made the connection. He breathed. "The shell company that sold me the land. That was you." I smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. "I bought this land for $200,000 because it was worthless mud. I sold it to you for $5 million. You were so greedy, so desperate to look like a big shot that you didn't even check the soil. You just saw a deal and grabbed it." I leaned in close so only he could hear. "I used your money to buy your debt, Hunter. I financed my own revenge with your greed." Suddenly, a phone rang loudly in the front row. It was the banker's phone. He answered it, listened for a second, and then stood up, his face gray. "Dump the stock," he shouted into his phone. "Dump it all. Now." He turned to the other investors. "The news just broke on Bloomberg. Virtue Ventures is under investigation for land fraud. The stock is in free fall." The tent erupted into a stampede. Men in expensive suits were running for the exits, shouting into their phones, trying to salvage their portfolios. My parents stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, looking like statues of confusion. My father grabbed Hunter by the lapels of his coat. "What did you do?" he screamed. "What did you do with the church's money?" Hunter pushed him away. "Get off me!" I stood calmly in the center of the storm, watching them turn on each other. Miss Etta walked up to me holding her tablet. "Virtue Ventures is down 60%, she reported. "Trading has been halted by the SEC. The banks are calling in the loans." I looked at Hunter. He was standing alone near the podium, watching his investors drive away. The gold-plated shovels had been knocked over in the panic, lying in the mud like cheap toys. "It looks like the groundbreaking is canceled," I said. Hunter looked at me. There was no arrogance left in his eyes, only fear. "You ruined me," he whispered. "No, Hunter," I said, turning to walk away. "I just turned on the lights. The rot was already there." I walked back to the Escalade, leaving my family in the wreckage of their own ambition. The wind howled through the empty tent, flapping the canvas like a shroud. It was cold, but for the first time in 10 years I felt perfectly warm. The Sunday service at Grace Cathedral was usually a production of high theater filled with swelling organ music and a choir that swayed in perfect unison. But today the atmosphere was thick with tension. The air conditioner was humming on full blast, yet sweat was visibly beading on my father's forehead as he stood at the pulpit. Bishop Desmond looked like a man who was trying to hold back a tidal wave with a paper umbrella. The pews were packed, but the energy wasn't devotional. It was anxious. News of the Eden Gardens disaster had leaked, and whispers were moving through the congregation like wildfire. I stood in the back, hidden in the shadows of the vestibule, watching the final act of this tragedy unfold. Beside me stood Miss Etta. But this wasn't the woman I had met in the sewer tunnels. She was transformed. She wore a tailored cream suit that cost more than my father's car. Her hair was styled in a sleek silver bob, and she held herself with the terrifying authority of a Fortune 500 executive. "It is time," Etta said, adjusting her pearl necklace. "Go get them, Miss CFO," I whispered. Inside the sanctuary, my father was reaching the crescendo of his desperate plea. "The devil is testing us," he shouted, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "The enemy has attacked our family business. They have attacked our reputation. And now they are trying to attack this holy house. We are facing a financial crisis, my brothers and sisters. A liquidity crunch caused by spiritual warfare." He paused, wiping his face with a handkerchief. "We need an emergency offering. We need to protect the church. I am asking every one of you to dig deep today. Not for me, but for the legacy of this ministry. We need to raise $500,000 by noon to stop the banks from seizing God House." Ushers began moving down the aisles with collection baskets. I saw elderly women reaching into their purses, pulling out checkbooks. I saw men reaching for their wallets. They were about to throw their savings into a black hole. Suddenly, a high-pitched screech of audio feedback tore through the room. People covered their ears. The choir stopped singing. My father tapped the microphone frantically. "Is this thing on? Sound booth, what is happening?" The massive LED screens behind the pulpit, which were displaying a loop of my father praying in a garden, flickered and went black. The sanctuary was plunged into confusion. Then the screens roared back to life. But it wasn't scripture. It was a spreadsheet. A woman's voice boomed over the speakers, clear, crisp, and authoritative. "Put your checkbooks away, ladies and gentlemen. The bishop doesn't need your money. He has plenty of it." My father froze. He looked up at the balcony, searching for the source of the voice. "Who is that?" he demanded. "Security. Cut the feed." But the feed didn't cut. Instead, the heavy double doors at the side of the altar swung open. Miss Etta walked out. She didn't rush. She walked to the center of the stage, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She held a tablet in one hand and a wireless microphone in the other. A gasp went through the older members of the congregation. They recognized her. She was Etta James, the woman who had vanished 10 years ago, the woman everyone thought had died of shame after going to prison. "Hello, Grace Cathedral," Etta said, smiling at the stunned crowd. "Remember me? I used to keep the books for this church. I sat in that office for 20 years, and today I am back to do one final audit." My father looked like he was having a heart attack. "Etta," he stammered, you are supposed to be gone." Etta finished for him. "Yes, I know. But the thing about numbers, Desmond, is that they never disappear. They just hide." She tapped her tablet. The spreadsheet on the giant screen zoomed in on a specific column highlighted in red. "Desmond just told you he needs $500,000 for a liquidity crisis," Etta explained to the crowd. "But here is a bank transfer from the church general fund dated 3 days ago." She pointed to the screen. $500,000 transferred to an entity called VV, Holdings in the Cayman Islands. Hunter, who was sitting in the front row, jumped up. "Stop this. This is illegal. You hacked our accounts." "Sit down, boy," Etta commanded, her voice whipping like a lash. "I didn't hack anything. I am the legal owner of the debt on this building, which gives me full access to the financial records." She swiped the tablet again. A new image appeared. It was a photo of a bank statement next to a photo of a designer handbag. "You see this transaction?" Etta continued. $50,000 labeled as famine relief for Haiti." The crowd murmured. They remembered that offering. They had given generously. "Well," Etta said, "unless Haiti has a Hermes boutique, I think there has been a mistake, because the tracking number for that purchase leads directly to the closet of Mrs. Patricia Brooks." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. All eyes turned to my mother. She was clutching her handbag, the very one Etta was describing, to her chest. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Lies," my mother shrieked, standing up. "That is a lie. This is a replica." Etta laughed. "Patricia, please. We both know you don't do replicas, and we also know you don't do charity." Etta swiped again. More images flashed on the screen. Here is the $100,000 raised for the youth center roof. It went to pay off Hunter's gambling debts at the Horseshoe Casino. An image of a casino marker with Hunter's signature appeared. Here is the money for the choir robes. It went to a leasing company for a Range Rover. Etta walked closer to my father, who was gripping the pulpit so hard his knuckles were white. "You have been stealing from these people for a decade, Desmond. You didn't kick your daughter out because she was rebellious. You kicked her out because she started asking questions about where the money was going. You let her freeze in the snow to protect your slush fund." The silence in the church broke. It didn't break with a prayer. It broke with a roar. A man in the third row, a deacon who had served with my father for 20 years, stood up. His face was purple with rage. "I gave you my retirement money," he screamed. "My wife skipped her heart medication to give to that building fund." My father held up his hands. "Brother Thomas, please. It is a misunderstanding. The devil is manipulating the data." "Don't you talk to me about the devil," an old woman shouted from the back. "You are the devil." She reached into her purse, but instead of an offering envelope, she pulled out her heavy, leather-bound hymnal. She hurled it at the stage. It flew through the air, pages flapping, and struck my father square in the chest. It was the spark that lit the powder keg. Suddenly, the air was filled with flying objects. Bibles pursuing programs, purses, and even shoes were raining down on the altar. People were climbing over the pews, screaming for justice. The veneer of holiness had shattered, replaced by the raw, violent anger of betrayal. "Thief," the crowd chanted. "Liar." "Thief." My mother tried to run, but she was blocked by a wall of angry choir members. "You bought a bag with my money!" a soprano screamed, grabbing my mother's fur coat. "I worked double shifts for that money." Hunter tried to punch his way out, but 3 large men tackled him to the ground near the communion table. Outside, the wail of sirens cut through the chaos. I had called them 10 minutes ago. Etta stood calm in the center of the storm, unmoving. She watched the empire of lies crumble around her. She looked up at the balcony where I was hiding. She didn't smile. She just nodded. It was done. My father was cowering behind the pulpit, shielding his head from the barrage of debris. He looked small. He looked pathetic. The man who had played God was now terrified of his own flock. The doors burst open again, but this time it wasn't a savior. It was the Chicago Police Department. Officers in tactical gear swarmed the aisles, pushing back the angry mob. Desmond Brooks, a sergeant, shouted over a megaphone. "Patricia Brooks, Hunter Vance. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." I watched as the police dragged my father down the steps. His robes were torn. His face was smeared with something that looked like a broken egg. He was crying real tears this time, tears of a man who knew his life was over. As they cuffed him, he looked up and saw Etta standing over him. "Why?" he sobbed. "Why did you do this?" Etta looked down at him with cold pity. "Because Desmond," she said softly, her voice picked up by the microphone one last time. "You forgot the first rule of accounting. Eventually the bill always comes due." I turned and walked out of the vestibule, leaving the noise and the fury behind me. The snow outside had stopped falling. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. I took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. I didn't need to see them put in the squad cars. I knew where they were going. And I knew that for the first time in 10 years, I was truly, completely free. The front door of the Brooks estate crashed open, splintering the expensive oak frame. My father, Desmond, stumbled into the foyer, first his face pale and streaked with sweat. My mother, Patricia, followed him. her fur coat torn, one of her heels missing, making her limp frantically across the marble floor. And finally, Hunter. He slammed the door shut behind them and threw the heavy deadbolt, locking it with shaking hands. He leaned his back against the wood, sliding down until he hit the floor, gasping for air like a drowning man. They were safe. Or so they thought. They believed the thick walls of this mansion could protect them from the angry mob at the church and the police sirens wailing in the distance. They thought this house was still their fortress. They didn't realize it had already become their prison. I watched them from the large wingback chair in the corner of the living room. I had been sitting there for 20 minutes sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea that I had brewed in my mother's favorite china pot. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the panic they had just brought in with them. "Welcome home," I said softly. The sound of my voice acted like a gunshot. All three of them jumped. Hunter scrambled to his feet, his eyes wild and bloodshot. My mother let out a strangled scream, clutching her chest. My father just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You," Hunter rasped. "How did you get in here?" I smiled, setting the teacup down on the saucer with a delicate clink. "I have keys, Hunter. I own the locks. Remember." Hunter let out a roar of pure, unadulterated rage. He charged into the living room, knocking over a vase of fresh lilies. The water spilled across the floor, mixing with the mud on his shoes. He looked like a cornered animal, stripped of his dignity, stripped of his lies, left with nothing but his primal instinct to destroy. "You ruined everything," he screamed, pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace. "You destroyed my company. You turned the church against us. You humiliated me in front of the whole city." "I didn't ruin you, Hunter," I said calmly, crossing my legs. "I just stopped you from ruining anyone else." He stopped pacing. He turned to face me, and for the first time I saw the true depth of his madness. He reached into the waistband of his trousers. My father gasped. My mother covered her mouth. Hunter pulled out a gun. It was a small black pistol, likely unregistered, something he kept for protection during his shady deals. His hand was shaking so badly that the barrel waved in the air, pointing first at the ceiling, then at me. "Hunter, no!" my father shouted, stepping forward. "Put it away! You are making it worse." "Shut up, old man," Hunter snapped, not looking away from me. "It can't get any worse. I am finished. I am going to jail. The investors are going to kill me." He took a step closer to me, the gun leveled at my chest. "But I am not going down alone," he hissed. "You are coming with me, Sienna. You started this. You are going to end it." I looked at the black hole of the barrel. It should have been terrifying. 10 years ago, the girl shivering in the snow would have begged for her life. She would have cried and promised him anything just to live. But that girl was gone. The woman sitting in the chair had faced things much colder than a bullet. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my hands. I simply reached for my tea and took another sip. The warmth of the liquid was comforting. "You are shaking, Hunter." I observed, my voice flat and conversational. "You are going to miss at this range. Or worse, you will hit the antique mirror behind me, and that would be a shame. It is worth more than your life right now." "Stop talking," he screamed, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Stop looking at me like that. I will kill you. I swear to God, I will kill you." "Go ahead," I said. "Pull the trigger." I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. "But before you do, you might want to look out the window." Hunter blinked, confused. "What?" I pointed to the large bay window that overlooked the circular driveway. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn back, revealing the gray afternoon light. "Look outside, Hunter. See who is waiting for you." He hesitated. He kept the gun pointed at me, but he glanced sideways toward the window. My father and mother turned to look as well. At first there was nothing, just the long driveway and the manicured hedges. But then movement caught their eyes. 3 black SUVs were parked horizontally across the gate, blocking the exit. They weren't police cars. There were no flashing lights, no sirens. Just heavy, dark, armored vehicles with tinted windows. Leaning against the hood of the middle car was a man. He was huge, wearing a long leather coat. He was smoking a cigarette, staring directly at the house. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting. Hunter's face went from red to a terrifying shade of gray. The gun lowered slightly. "Who is that?" he whispered. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my skirt. "You know who that is, Hunter. You borrowed $2 million from him 3 months ago to cover your losses at the casino. You put up the Eden Gardens project as collateral." Hunter dropped the gun. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. "Ivan," he breathed. "Oh my God. It is Ivan." "Yes," I said. "Ivan the butcher. That is what the papers call him, isn't it? Although I believe his business card says import-export consultant." I walked over to the window and stood next to Hunter. I waved at the man outside. He didn't wave back. He just flicked his cigarette onto the driveway and crushed it under his boot. "You see, Hunter, when I bought your debt, I didn't just buy the loans from the bank. I bought everything. I bought your credit card debt. I bought your mortgage. And yesterday afternoon I had a very interesting meeting with Mr. Ivan." Hunter looked at me with horror. You talked to him." "I did more than talk," I said. "I wrote him a check. I bought your marker, Hunter. I paid off your principal." Hope flickered in Hunter's eyes for a second. "You paid him. So he is gone." I laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound. "No, Hunter. I bought the debt. That means I am the new creditor. But Mr. Ivan, he has a strict policy about late fees. And since you are very, very late, I told him he could collect the interest in whatever currency he prefers." I looked at the man outside again. He was reaching into the back of his SUV. He pulled out something long and metal. It wasn't a tire iron, it was a crowbar. "I think he prefers pain," I whispered. Hunter fell to his knees. He grabbed the hem of my dress. "Sienna, please. You can't let them in. They will kill me. They will cut me into pieces. Please, I will do anything. I will sign anything. Call the police. Call them back." I looked down at him. This was the man who had laughed while I froze. This was the man who had poisoned his own wife. I stepped back, pulling my dress from his grasp. "I can't call the police, Hunter. You smashed the landline phone when you came in, and I think the cell service in this house is about to be very unreliable." I turned to my parents. They were huddled in the corner holding each other. They weren't looking at me with anger anymore. They were looking at me with the realization that they were trapped in a cage with a monster they had created. "You should probably go upstairs, Mom," I said. "Lock the bedroom door. Put in your earplugs. You don't want to hear what happens when the interest comes due." A loud, heavy thud shook the front door. Then another. And another. The wood groaned under the impact of the crowbar. Hunter screamed. He scrambled backward, crawling like a crab across the floor, trying to find a place to hide. But there was nowhere to hide. The house was glass and open space. I picked up my purse. I walked to the back door, the servants' entrance, the same door I had been kicked out of 10 years ago. "Sienna, don't leave us," my father cried out. I stopped at the door. I looked back at the panic, the fear, the absolute destruction of their perfect world. "The door is unlocked, Hunter," I said. "You might want to run, but I don't think you will make it to the gate. It is a long driveway, and it is very cold outside." I opened the back door and stepped out. The last thing I heard before I closed it was the sound of the front door splintering open and the heavy, ominous footsteps of men who had come to collect. The sound of a crowbar hitting a human kneecap is a sound you never forget. It is wet, dull, and final. I stood on the back porch of the estate, wrapping my coat tighter around myself, against the chill, listening to the symphony of consequences playing out in the driveway. Hunter had tried to run. He had made it about 50 yards, sprinting toward the hedgerow like a frightened rabbit. But Ivan's men were faster. They didn't kill him. Death would have been too easy. Death is a release. Debt is a cage, and Ivan was just making sure the prisoner couldn't walk out of it. I heard Hunter scream, a high-pitched, animalistic sound that tore through the manicured silence of the neighborhood. "My leg," he shrieked. "You broke my leg." I took a sip of the cold air, watching as the black SUVs began to pull away. Their job was done. They had collected their pound of flesh. As their taillights faded, a new set of lights flooded the driveway. Blue and red. The police had arrived. I had timed it perfectly. I wanted Hunter broken enough that he couldn't run, but alive enough to stand trial. I walked back inside the house. The hallway was quiet now. My parents were huddled in the foyer, sitting on the antique bench where my mother used to make me wait while she inspected my outfits for imperfections. They looked up when I entered. Desmond's face was gray, stripped of all its pompous authority. Patricia was trembling, clutching her torn fur coat, her eyes darting around the room as if the walls might save her. "Sienna," my father croaked, standing up on shaky legs. "Thank God. Hunter went crazy. He had a gun. You have to tell the police. We are victims here." I looked at him. Even now, at the end of the world, he was trying to spin the narrative. He was still the bishop trying to write the sermon where he emerged as the hero. "You are not a victim, Desmond," I said, walking past him to the front door. "You are an accomplice." I opened the heavy oak door. Sheriff Miller was standing there, flanked by two deputies. Miller was a good man, a man who had attended my father's church for years, but he was also a man who respected the law more than the cloth. He took off his hat when he saw me. "Ms. Brooks," he said, nodding respectfully. "We have your brother-in-law in custody out back. Paramedics are patching him up before we take him to the station. He is ranting about mafia hitmen, but we found the gun with his prints on it inside." "Thank you, Sheriff," I said. "And the other matter." Sheriff Miller sighed, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. He looked at my parents with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "Desmond. Patricia. I am sorry it has come to this, but I have a court order here." He stepped into the foyer and handed the paper to my father. "This is an immediate order of eviction and a restraining order," Miller explained. "The title of this property was transferred to Nemesis Holdings at 9 a.m. this morning, following a foreclosure trigger. You are currently trespassing on private property." My mother stood up, her voice shrill and hysterical. "Trespassing? This is my house. I designed this foyer. I picked out this marble. You cannot kick me out of my own home." "It is not your home, Mrs. Brooks," I interrupted, my voice calm. "It is my asset, and I have decided to liquidate it." Liquidation implies cleaning out the inventory. I snapped my fingers. Marcus, my bodyguard, walked in from the study. He was carrying something. It wasn't a weapon, it was a suitcase. A battered brown faux leather suitcase with a broken handle, the same suitcase my father had thrown at me 10 years ago. I had kept it. I had dragged it through the snow, slept on it in the tunnels, and moved it into every apartment I had ever rented. It was my reminder. Marcus dropped the suitcase at my father's feet. It landed with a heavy thud, dust motes dancing in the light of the chandelier. "What is this?" my father asked, staring at the bag. "It is your severance package," I said. I kicked the suitcase closer to him. 10 years ago, on my 18th birthday, you packed my life into this bag. You told me that legally you owed me nothing. You told me to get out." I pointed to the door. "Well, Dad, legally I owe you nothing. In fact, according to the audit, you owe me about $4 million. But I am feeling generous today. I packed for you." My mother looked at the bag with horror. "You packed? What is in there?" "Your old clothes," I said, "the ones you wore before you started embezzling from the church. I found them in the back of the attic, some polyester shirts, a few pairs of sensible shoes. And for you, Dad, a Bible. I think you might need to reread the part about greed." Patricia lunged for the staircase. "No. My jewelry. My furs. I am not leaving without my things." Stone, my other bodyguard, stepped in front of the stairs, blocking her path like a mountain. "Stop," I commanded. "Everything in this house was purchased with stolen funds or secured against debt that I now own. The furniture, the art, the clothes in your closet, even the jewelry you are wearing. It is all collateral. It stays here." "You can't do this," my mother screamed, clawing at Stone's chest. "This is cruel. I am your mother." I looked at her. I searched my heart for a flicker of sympathy for that biological tug that says you should forgive the woman who gave you birth. I found nothing. I only remembered the slap on my birthday. I remembered her watching me walk into the snow. "Cruelty is a teacher, Mom," I said softly. "You taught me well." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, placing a hand on my father's shoulder. "It is time to go, Desmond. Don't make me use the cuffs." My father looked at me one last time. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed, and full of hate. "You are the devil," he spat. I smiled. "No, Dad. I am just the judgment you preached about." The deputies took them by the arms. They didn't walk out with dignity. My mother kicked and screamed, her heels skidding on the marble she loved so much. One of her shoes came off, leaving her hopping on one foot, looking disheveled and frantic. My father slumped his legs, dragging muttering prayers that nobody was listening to. I followed them out. I wanted to see it. I needed to see it. They were dragged down the front steps, past the stone lions that guarded the entrance. The wind had picked up, cutting through their thin indoor clothes. It wasn't 20 below zero like the night I left, but it was cold enough to bite. They reached the main gate, the same iron gate that had been locked against me. The deputies marched them through it and onto the public sidewalk. "Okay, that is the property line," Sheriff Miller said. "If you step back onto the driveway, you will be arrested." My mother grabbed the iron bars, her face pressed between them, her makeup streaming down her cheeks. "Sienna, please," she wailed, her voice carrying over the wind. "Where are we supposed to go? We have no money. We have no car." I stood on the other side of the gate, wrapped in my warm wool coat. I looked at the suitcase sitting on the sidewalk next to them. "I hear the shelter downtown opens at 6, I said. "If you start walking now, you might beat the line." "But it is 5 miles away," my father shouted. "I know," I said. "I walked it in a blizzard. You have it easy. It is a sunny day." I reached out and grabbed the heavy iron gate. It swung shut with a screech of metal that sounded like music. I threw the deadbolt. Click. I stood there for a moment watching them. Two small figures on the sidewalk surrounded by the ruin of their own making. My mother was sobbing into her hands. My father was yelling at the sky. A news van pulled up to the curb, cameras flashing, ready to capture the fall of the great Bishop Brooks. I turned my back on them. I walked up the long driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel. I looked up at the house. It was a fortress of lies, but I was going to tear it down and build something real. I walked into the foyer and closed the heavy front door, shutting out the cold, shutting out the screaming, and shutting out the past forever. I was finally warm. The sound of a gavel hitting a wooden block is remarkably similar to the sound of a coffin lid slamming shut. It is a sharp final note that signals the end of a life. I sat in the back row of the federal courthouse watching the end of the Brooks dynasty. It didn't happen with a bang, but with a whimper. My father, the man who used to command stadiums of followers, stood before the judge looking like a shrunken version of himself. Without his purple robes, without his gold rings, and without the platform of the altar, Desmond Brooks was just an old man in a cheap suit provided by a public defender. The judge was not swayed by my father's attempts to quote scripture. In fact, she seemed offended by them. When she read the sentence, her voice was devoid of pity. For 20 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement of charitable funds, and tax evasion, Desmond was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. But the real blow came afterward. The church council, led by the deacon who had thrown the first hymnal, held a public ceremony to formally defrock him. They stripped him of his title. He was no longer Bishop Brooks. He was just inmate number 74,309. I watched him being led away in handcuffs, weeping not for his sins, but for his loss of status. He looked at me as he passed the gallery, his eyes searching for some sign of mercy. I simply checked my watch. My mother Patricia avoided prison time by turning state's witness against her husband and Hunter. She claimed she was a victim of their manipulation, a naive housewife who knew nothing of the finances. The court believed her, Or perhaps they just didn't think she was smart enough to be a mastermind, but her punishment was perhaps worse than a cell. She was left destitute. Her credit was ruined. Her social circle had ostracized her, and she was forced to move into a state-assisted housing facility on the south side. The woman who once panicked if her champagne wasn't chilled to the perfect temperature was now living on food stamps. But the most poetic justice was reserved for my sister Chantel. I decided to take a drive before my final appointment of the day. I drove my Bentley to the Oakbrook Center, the luxury outdoor mall where Chantel and I used to go as teenagers. Well, she used to go to shop. I used to go to carry her bags. It was a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. I walked past the gleaming windows of Neiman Marcus and Nordstrom. I stopped at the food court not to eat, but to watch. And there she was. Chantel was wearing a gray uniform that was 2 sizes too big. Her hair, once bleached to a perfect platinum blonde, was showing dark roots and was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was pushing a heavy yellow mop bucket on wheels. She stopped in front of the Gucci store, the very store where she had bought a purse 3 months ago with stolen church money. Someone had spilled a smoothie on the pristine white tile. I stood behind a pillar and watched. A group of women walked by, women Chantel used to brunch with. They saw her. They paused for a second, recognition flickering in their eyes, and then they looked away, walking faster, pretending she was invisible. Chantel saw them too. She gripped the mop handle, her knuckles turning white, her face burning with shame. She looked down, scrubbing the floor furiously, trying to erase herself from existence. She had to work here. It was part of her court-mandated restitution. She had to pay back every cent she had spent on her credit cards, and the judge had ordered garnishment of her wages. She would be scrubbing these floors for the next 40 years. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. Seeing her kneeling on the ground, cleaning the mess of the people she used to envy was enough. I turned and walked away, the click of my heels echoing on the tiles she had just polished. I left the mall and drove 2 hours south to the Stateville Correctional Center. This was a maximum security facility, a place of concrete steel and despair. I parked my car and walked to the visitor entrance. The guards checked my ID and ran me through the metal detector. They looked at my suit, my bag, and my demeanor, and they treated me with a deference they rarely showed to visitors. They knew who I was. I wasn't just a sister-in-law. I was the woman who put half the guys in cell block C behind bars. I was led to a private visitation booth. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. I sat down on the metal stool and waited. 5 minutes later, the heavy steel door on the other side buzzed open. Hunter walked in. The transformation was shocking. It had only been 3 months since the arrest, but he looked like he had aged a decade. His head was shaved. He had lost at least 20 pounds. His nose, which had been broken by Ivan's men, had healed crookedly, giving his face a jagged, menacing look. He walked with a severe limp, his left leg dragging slightly, a permanent reminder of the debt he couldn't pay. He sat down across from me. There was a thick pane of bulletproof glass between us. He picked up the black phone receiver. His hands were covered in prison tattoos, crude ink done with a needle and melted plastic. He had adapted quickly, or perhaps the criminal inside him had finally come to the surface. I picked up my phone. "Hello, Hunter," I said. He stared at me. His eyes were dead. There was no anger left, no arrogance, just a vast, empty hollow. "You came," he rasped. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in days. "I received your letter," I said. "You said you had something to say." He looked down at the metal counter. "I wanted to ask you why. I wanted to ask you why you didn't just take the money and leave. Why did you have to burn it all down?" "We offered you a way out." I leaned forward, my reflection ghosting over his face in the glass. "You didn't offer me a way out, Hunter. You offered me a bribe to stay dead. There is a difference." He let out a short, dry laugh. 20 years. That is what they gave me. Conspiracy to commit murder. Fraud. Racketeering. I will be 55 when I get out. If I get out. Ivan has friends in here, you know. I sleep with one eye open. I know, I said. I made sure of it. He looked up at me, a flicker of his old hatred sparking in his eyes. You are a monster, Sienna. You talk about justice, but you enjoyed this. You enjoyed watching us suffer. I didn't enjoy it, I corrected him. I executed it. It was business. Business, he spat. You destroyed your own family for business. I destroyed a criminal organization, I said calmly. It just happened to share my last name. He shook his head, looking defeated again. You know, I think about that night a lot. The night of your birthday. The blizzard. I stayed silent. I think about what would have happened if I had just opened the gate, he continued. If I had just let you walk to the bus station. You would have left. You would have been some poor waitress in another city. We would have kept the money. We would have been happy. He looked at me, pleading for validation. I could have saved us all if I had just been a little bit nicer. That is the joke, isn't it? I looked at this broken man. I looked at the crooked nose, the orange jumpsuit, the shaking hands. I thought about the girl freezing in the snow, crying, begging for her life. And I realized he was wrong. No, Hunter, I said softly. He frowned. What? I said no. You are wrong. If you had opened that gate, you would have saved yourself, yes. But you would have killed me. I don't understand, he said. If you had opened the gate, I would have remained Sienna the victim, I explained. I would have spent my life running away, afraid of my own shadow, grateful for scraps. I would have been weak. I stood up. I placed my hand on the glass directly over where his heart would be. But you didn't open the gate, Hunter. You locked me out. You threw me into the ice. You forced me to die. And in that darkness, I had to find a fire inside myself just to keep breathing. I had to become something else, something harder, something sharper. I leaned in close to the glass, staring deep into his eyes. I didn't come here to gloat, Hunter. I came here to thank you. He recoiled, confused. Thank me. Yes, I said. Thank you for not opening the door. Thank you for the cruelty. Thank you for the cold. Because you didn't kill me, Hunter. You made me. You stripped away everything that was weak and left only the weapon. You are the architect of your own destruction because you built me. I hung up the phone. Hunter started shouting, slamming his fist against the glass, but I couldn't hear him. I turned my back on him and walked toward the exit. The heavy steel door buzzed open, leading me out into the sunlight. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my boots. I looked up at the sky. It was vast and blue and limitless. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. I was Sienna Brooks. I was the CEO of Nemesis Holdings. I was the woman who walked through hell and came out owning the place. I got into my car and started the engine. I didn't look back at the prison. I put the car in drive and pulled onto the highway, driving fast. Driving free, driving toward a future that was entirely, undeniably mine. The cemetery was quiet, blanketed in a layer of fresh white snow that sparkled under the morning sun. It was the kind of pristine, peaceful winter day that made you forget the violence of a blizzard. I stood in front of a brand new headstone made of pink granite. It read, Rose Brooks, beloved grandmother. She was finally resting, and she was resting in peace, knowing that the vultures who had circled her deathbed had been scattered to the winds. Standing beside me was Miss Etta. She was wearing a thick wool coat, a cashmere scarf, and leather gloves. She looked like a stateswoman. She looked like the executive she was always meant to be. We stood in silence for a long time, watching our breath mist in the cold air. She would have been proud of you, Etta said softly. She would have loved seeing Desmond face the music. I nodded. I think she would have. She always hated his sermons anyway. She said he preached charity, but practiced greed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a heavy iron key. It was an old-fashioned skeleton key, the ceremonial key to the front door of the Brooks estate. I held it out to Etta. What is this? She asked, looking at the key sitting in my palm. I told the sheriff to hand over the property to Nemesis Holdings, I said. But Nemesis isn't going to flip that house. I don't want to sell it. I don't want the money from it. That soil is poisoned for me. Then what are you doing with it? Etta asked. I took her hand and pressed the key into her palm, closing her fingers over it. I am giving it to you, Etta. She tried to pull her hand away, shaking her head. Sienna? No. That is a $5 million estate. I can't take that. You can and you will, I insisted. But it is not going to be a house anymore. I filed the paperwork this morning. The Brooks estate is now the Etta James Foundation. It is going to be a transitional home for women who have nowhere else to go. Women who are sleeping in tunnels. Women who are running from abusive husbands. Women who have been thrown out into the snow. Etta stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. You want me to turn your father's mansion into a shelter? She whispered. I smiled. It is the ultimate poetic justice, isn't it? The house that was built on exclusion will now be open to everyone. I want you to run it, Etta. You are the CEO. You hire the staff. You manage the budget. You save them just like you saved me. Etta looked down at the key, clutching it to her chest. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. She just nodded, a fierce determination returning to her eyes. I will fill every room, she said. I will put a bed in the dining room where they ate their fancy dinners. I will put a library in Hunter's man cave. We will make it a sanctuary. We walked out of the cemetery together, the snow crunching under our boots. Waiting for us on the tarmac of the private airfield nearby was a helicopter. Its blades were already spinning, cutting through the air with a rhythmic thumping sound that signaled departure. I turned to Etta one last time. I have to go back to New York, I said. The market never sleeps, and I have a hostile takeover to plan for next week. Etta hugged me. It was a mother's hug, warm and protective, the kind of hug Patricia had never given me. You be careful up there, Sienna, she said. Don't forget where you came from. I won't, I promised. I came from the cold, and I am never going back. I walked toward the helicopter, ducking under the rotors. I climbed into the leather seat and put on the headset. The pilot gave me a thumbs up. Ready for takeoff, Ms. Brooks? The pilot asked. Ready, I said. As the helicopter lifted off the ground, the city of Chicago began to shrink beneath me. I saw the grid of streets, the frozen river, and the tiny cars moving like ants. I saw the church now closed and wrapped in police tape. I saw the estate soon to be filled with new life. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text message from an unknown number. But I knew who it was. Sienna, please. It is Chantel. I am on my break at the mall. They garnered my whole paycheck. I don't have money for lunch. Can you please just Venmo me $100? Just 100. I am your sister. Please. I stared at the screen. 10 years ago, I had begged for my life. Today, she was begging for a sandwich. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing. It was just a transaction request from a stranger. I tapped the screen. I didn't type a reply. I simply pressed block contact. I put the phone away and looked out the window. The helicopter banked left, soaring above the clouds. The sun was blindingly bright up here. The storm was over. The blizzard was just a memory. I was untouchable. I was free. And as I flew toward the horizon, I finally smiled. The view from the top was magnificent. This story teaches us that family is defined by behavior, not biology. Sharing DNA gives no one the right to abuse, neglect, or exploit you. Sienna's journey from a frozen victim to a powerful victor proves that your trauma does not have to be your identity. It reminds us that the best revenge is not violence, but the absolute removal of your presence and your resources from those who do not value you. Sometimes you have to let the bridge burn so you can see your way forward, and true power comes when you stop seeking validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding you. If this story ignited a fire in you, hit the like button and subscribe for more tales of justice and resilience. Share this video with someone who needs to know that it is okay to walk away from toxic relationships to save yourself. Remember, you are the author of your own life, and it is never too late to write a new ending. Thank you for watching.